feels like a big deal for some reason. Okay, bear with me if I tear up. So, this is my story growing up in a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christianity and the impact it had on me as an adult. So I was born in the 80s into a loving family. I'm the middle of 3 brothers. I really did have a great childhood. I played basketball and did gymnastics in the gym church with all my friends. I got to play the drums and other instruments after services, and there was lots of opportunities for art and creativity. And these are all still my favorite things to do. A church was twice on Sundays, Wednesday nights, many Friday nights, and then we had small groups and events throughout the week. We sang church songs before bed every night. I knew my parents loved us and wanted the best for us. And so I do feel very fortunate. But from birth, I was thrown into the weirdest Pentecostal fundamentalism. For example, there was like screaming in tongues and casting out demons, anointing oils, spiritual sweat rags, people dancing with ribbons and prophecies, traveling, healing magicians, and revival, just to name a few of the things. The Bible was called your sword, and my kids' club was called the Crusaders. So holy war was really good, and sex was bad, and everyone outside of the church was bad. But I didn't know that any other reality existed other than that. So I never had a love for God. I just had a fear of God. So that's kind of the theme of my trauma therapy here with all of you, is to try and feel safe and not catastrophize everything. Every problem isn't the end of the world. So in my childhood years, I knew that all my friends, all my relatives, all my neighbors, all my teachers were going to hell because they didn't go to church. I was told that angels and demons and the spiritual world was more real than the physical world. And there's constantly a war going on, like right now, for your soul. As early as 4 or 5 years old, I heard about the end times and about the rapture. I became very anxious about the world ending and my parents leaving me. Numerous times I thought I missed the rapture and was just in a helpless panic. We were isolated for decades from pop culture, so very limited non-Christian movies, shows, or music. All of these things, they had demons in them, and they were all traps set by the devil. Many times I cried and begged for forgiveness for listening to non-Christian music. As a young child and early teenager, I would help paint and create props there was an annual play called Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames. And I recommend, just for fun, YouTube that, Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames, and you can see some of these church plays, and they're still going on today, all over the place. And just watch it and imagine like a young kid seeing that over and over again. It's a play that's performed by members of the church. And the devil was always the only black guy in our church, which I think is kind of funny. The play included loud music and choreographed flashing lights. They would strobe red lights when the devil came out to grab a mom away from their daughter to drag her into hell. So the play basically acts out people who died, and then what happens to them. Do they get to meet Jesus and walk up the stairs, or do they get dragged into hell by demons? Then there were also all of the Left Behind video series. And still 30 years later, I see fearful scenes in my minds of parents being ripped away from kids by SWAT teams and devices being put on their heads because they were Christians who refused to conform. These movies showed all the Christians being persecuted for their beliefs, and it was celebrated. So to die for your beliefs was to be the ultimate Christian. My childhood fear advanced when my mom told me that until I was about 10 years old, I would get into heaven because she was saved. But then after that, and in my early teens, I just never knew if I was saved. There were sermons about the mark of the beast, microchip implants, and just horrible suffering. And this was common talk. I was always on edge that the world was ending. There were signs of the end times everywhere and the final judgment. Jesus was coming to take us away, and everyone was going to be cast into fire. So to deal with this, I just became very busy. I distracted myself from the fear of the world I was always tinkering and building things and constructing things. And I just put my head down and I created, I smoked weed and made websites and started businesses and made music and art. And I just never stopped working. My mom didn't like any of my art and said it looked like the occult. I was also called a peacemaker. And that's basically because I never rocked the boat. I didn't have my own opinions. I didn't question anything. I avoided conflict at all costs, and I never talked back or learned to be assertive or take care of my own needs. So now into the teenage years was depression and anxiety. So at 16, I was put on anti-anxiety medication and antidepressants, and I'm still pumped full of them. As a young teenager, on weekends and evenings, we spent them downtown at the Toronto Airport Church. It was a super wacky church with like really loud music and men yelling into microphones, people falling over, and I would just be like stepping over bodies like late into the night because my parents would stay late into like really late. As a teenager, I couldn't speak in tongues. I never got knocked over onto the floor laughing or crying. I never got healed when the faith healers showed up. I didn't believe any of it, but I was too scared of the consequences. So again, I just kept busy. I built stuff and I kept working and businesses and smoking weed, so I didn't have to face any of these fears. I was taught to be homophobic. I remember when Ellen DeGeneres came out as a lesbian. It was the first time I ever heard of same-sex couples. And Ellen was demonized, and it was clear that she was very bad. But I was confused by that because I loved Ellen and I thought she was so much fun and generous and inclusive and happy. And this religious trauma group is actually the first time that I've knowingly been around people who are not heterosexual. And I feel a bit ashamed about that. But I'm honored and brought to tears at how caring thoughtful, and human everyone is. Sorry, one sec. I recently felt grief over all the years of separation from so many wonderful parts of humanity. Whew. I was held out of sex ed at school because sex meant that you gave up part of your soul to someone. And sex led to orgies, homosexuality, diseases, and ultimately eternal punishment. I went on mission trips to Guatemala, Honduras, South Africa, the Congo, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And I was haunted by having so much after seeing so much suffering. So now the adult part. So basically, I continued to smoke weed and work. I never looked up and I never looked inward or faced any of my fears. I just avoided it for over 20 years. My parents are still deep in the God hole. For example, they're not getting the COVID shot because it's the devil's plan to bring in the globalists and their global agenda. And it's all ushering us closer to the end of the world. And so that's my parents. So now here I am, I'm an entrepreneur. My main business is almost 15 years old, and it grew to be a big business. And I felt horrible for being successful. I felt horrible for having any money. I felt like I was going to hell unless I gave all my money away. I couldn't feel joy now because joy in this life meant hell later. I wasn't allowed to feel proud of what I built. I wasn't allowed to be joyful. I had to save up for gifts in heaven, and suffering was noble. So I came to a point where I had done everything right in life, but I felt terrible. I had years of deep depression. I'd wake up in the morning and just look forward to going back to bed at night. Oh, I'm almost done. So I kind of hit a turning point when I said to myself, I'd rather die and go to hell than be alive. So there was one day I was in the shower and I said, fuck you, Jesus, just kill me. This sucks, being so afraid. I don't believe in God. And then nothing happened. My greatest fear was denying God, and I survived it this April 2021. So I started therapy. I went for 6 weeks intensive in care. And I got to kind of unpack everything in a safe place. And it was the hospital that introduced me to the concept of religious trauma. So I'm continuing to do all sorts of therapy, and mental health is a big part of what I do with my time. I'm thankful for this group. It's very helpful for me. Fundamentalist Christianity was the only reality I knew, and I was too scared to ever question it. So I'm kind of at a place where I'm discovering a whole new world, and then working hard to change thought patterns. It's hard and scary work, but fuck it. I want to be happy. I want to be calm and alive and strong, and I know that's just a matter of time.